earlier on I mentioned sort of the parallels between 1990s and right now, and there's the elephant in the room, which is Pashtun nationalism, specifically in Pakistan. And it was sort of relevant in the 80s and the early 90s with Hila Najibullah's father, Dr. Najib, allied with these sorts of people in Pakistan. And right now we have PTM, which is notorious or heroic, depending on your political persuasion. And it's been officially endorsed by Kabul, by Ashraf Ghani. So, how much of a factor is this with regard to Pakistan? Because, to be honest with you, Pashtun nationalist movements had lost a lot of credibility in Pakistan, especially in the aftermath of 9/11 and the invasion of Afghanistan. And now, sort of, once again, as a byproduct of security issues, it's sort of risen up in a new form. How does this affect any sort of policy making toward Afghanistan?
Look, it is a major irritant when you have your parliament, if they wear the hats, or you have tweets coming from whether it's President Ghani or Amrullah Saleh or anybody else, But I think here Pakistan has to be a little mature about it, because again, it's that tit for tat. If Pakistan can give statements regarding the Afghan Taliban, then I think we should be mature enough to hear the Afghans do that as well. Okay, to be very honest with you. But yes, it is an irritant that comes up. But I think I'll say this much. For the PTM, I think at the end of the day, they're Pakistanis, they're Pashtuns, and I think the only way to solve any solution is through dialogue. One of them is a member of our parliament, and to call them, blame them or call them, the word is not traitors or whatnot, I think that's not right. You have to engage with them. And, to be very honest, the people in FATA have suffered considerably. And, they still have, they have. And, I think of all the people in Pakistan, I think they've been the most patient, despite the fact that they've suffered for so long. They have genuine, concerns. They've got genuine grievances against the state. And I think the state has to engage with them. And you see, here's the problem. When the state does not engage with them, and when the state, calls them traitors or whatever, or they're being sponsored by foreign elements, it just makes it easier for other countries, including, the Afghans, to support the cause, and it just creates more problems. And we all know that President Ghani...
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And President Ghani, to be very honest, couldn't give two hoots about the PTM, but he uses it as a political card to put pressure on Pakistan. It's a tit-for-tat policy. And, it's interesting when I see, they're meant to be leaders and major stakeholders in the region, and they're meant to be, above these things. So I think... and I think it just derails any positive developments that take place between Pakistan and Afghanistan. One step forward, and then one step forward and two steps back. It's just that. And I think there has to be more political maturity here.
I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you've heard the Jawed Sharif song called Ya Qadam Pesh, Ya Qadam Pass, which means
yes.
Yeah. That's basically what you're referring to.
Yeah, very well. Yeah.
No, I think one of the... I'm glad you mentioned Amrullah Saleh earlier, because in Directorate S, what Steve Cole says is that when Karzai wanted to make overtures towards the Taliban, he would obviously say things like, these are my cousins, these are my family members, obviously because Karzai is from a specific part of Kandahar. Right. Mullah Bradar, for example, is from the same tribe as Hamid Karzai.
Right. Yeah.
But Amrullah Saleh in those days was very opposed to any sort of reconciliation or rapprochement with the Taliban, because he said this is going to reinstitute what he saw as Pashtun dominance in Afghanistan. Right. Now, we fast forward about 10 or so years, and Amrullah Saleh, who is a Farsiwan, is now a diehard Pashtun nationalist who wears the hats or whatever. So he almost converted to Pashtun, and not just a Pashtun, but to a Pashtun nationalist.
Yeah, how easily narratives change,
I know.
They're so fluid.
He's more keen on the hats than even Ashraf Ghani is.
Yeah, I think President Ghani, honestly, I feel that having this was another issue. Sorry, you've mentioned it, so I will point it out. When Amrullah Saleh, when he took him on board as his vice president, even before, And I think this was an issue even with Islamabad, because you see, you have other people like Hamdullah Mohib, who's a Pashtun, but he's been critical of Pakistan, and that's understandable. But Amrullah Saleh he just spouts venom. It's nothing positive comes out of that man's mouth, and I think it's very difficult. And again, even for the Taliban, even now, if you see his interviews, he does not accept the fact that the Americans have signed an agreement. Kabul will sooner or later speak to the Taliban. And then you've got this one person within the administration who's vehemently opposed to the Taliban, as well as any overtures between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I think he's a key irritant. We talk about spoilers, and he's a key irritant.
Yeah, Ashraf, you could say many things about Ashraf Ghani, but one thing he is not good at is picking his vice presidents.
Well, I think he did it more for other reasons, but yeah.
First it was Dostum. His choice of vice presidents isn't the greatest. But you spoke earlier. I think this is the final point I have, because quite a few points, but Afghanistan and Pakistan are like this, so conjoined twins. So there are a lot of issues. We're speaking about refugees, displaced people, IDPs. Now, a lot of people obviously know that there are couple of million Afghan refugees in Pakistan, but also there are people displaced from Fatah living in places like Khost and Paktia, specifically from Waziristan, a lot of Wazirs, a lot of Masouds. Their repatriation has sort of stalled as well. And I think my suspicion is that my instinct is that they don't want to be profiled, security profiled when they go back to Pakistan. They could face a lot of issues because Fatah is still recovering. What are some of the meaningful steps that could be taken by both Kabul and Islamabad to sort of help facilitate a repatriation, or for these people to move between the two countries easily? Because a lot of people in Afghanistan, like we said, need that movement. A lot of people in Pakistan need easing of movement. How can sort of a better future with regard to movement, what policies can be enacted?
Look, I think this refugee issue is such an important issue, and I think it could be used as a common ground between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And while, let's celebrate the fact that, when we're living in this world where you've seen in Europe the way they have become so anti, and they consider anybody else that comes as the other. I think this has to be appreciated that, at one point we hosted 5 million refugees, and this is no way and trying to rub it in the Afghan spaces. Not at all. We did this for our own, reasons. We gained from it. We benefited from it. And also because the people that moved across the border have always been moving to and fro, and they have never been considered as the other until very recently. And this has been politics, and I'll come to that. So we just had, I think it was in January, where the United Nations had this major event in Pakistan where it celebrated about 40 years of diversity, which was a salute to, the refugees that have been living here and the positive contribution that the Afghans have contributed in Pakistan. Now, I know time and again, you'll always hear from Pakistan that, well, we hosted them and, they owe us this. No, the Afghan refugees that lived here contributed. The day we changed our policy and we said that the refugees need to go back, and I'm talking about post-2015-16.
Was it when the shrine in Karachi was attacked?
Yes. And here I'll come to that. Our carpet industry has fully been, run by the Afghan refugees, our gemstone industry. And once the refugees were then being pushed out, our carpet industry went down. And let me hear, for both sides, this whole concept of the refugees are responsible for the terrorism in Pakistan is not true. Those that took part in the APS attack might have come from Afghanistan, but they were certainly not Afghan refugees living in our camps. And I'll give you another example. I wrote this paper on the Afghan refugees, which we circulated amongst different sections in our government. This notion was that they're responsible again for terrorism. I think Directorate of Security in KP, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, gave these figures, and they were published that out of, I think it was 100%, I think only 0.1% of Afghans were involved in petty crime. So, unfortunately, politics and this, the hostile relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan has really played a role in putting pressure on the refugees. And this is very sad and unfortunate, because a country that has openly welcomed Afghan refugees and treated them just like any other. You know it. I mean, most of the Afghan leadership lived in Pakistan. All my Afghan friends, went to the same schools as any Pakistani would, the same healthcare. There was no distinction. You wouldn't need to show papers when you rented a house. You could open, there was ample opportunities. And the fact that 5 decades of hospitality was just, washed down in one go when we just changed our policy and said, right, the Afghan refugees need to go back. This was a grave mistake, and I think the PTI government has realized this, that you cannot use the refugees as a card to put pressure on Kabul. And then you do remember, President Ghani, came back and said, you know what, you want to send them back, send them back. And then he initiated Pul Watan, Gul Watan, which unfortunately has been a disaster, because those refugees that do go back have nothing to go back for. There's nothing there. The land, and I've seen it, the land that has been, donated or set aside for the refugees, it's barren. Either people have taken it over or there's nothing happening because of corruption, which unfortunately is so, systematic in this part of the world. So for now, and one more point, we keep on saying we have around 1.4 to 1.5 registered refugees, and then we have 1.4 to 1.6 million unregistered. Here's the question mark. Pakistan does not know how many unregistered we have, because they came from 1979 and they continue to come. We did not register them until 2005. And so many of them have married. They're in all parts. They're in rural Sindh, urban Sindh. They're in Punjab. They're in Chatral. They're even in Azad Kashmir. And a lot of them did get, because again, we have corruption in Pakistan, they got ID cards, Pakistani ID cards. So let's not talk about the unregistered refugees, because that's just opening up a Pandora's box. For the registered refugees, there are many students. I have many people who intern with me at the institute, and students who work here and study here. They've been given POR cards, and they're consistently renewed. So they are legal and they can stay here. The process is a bit cumbersome. I won't deny that. But those living here, I think now the process has been streamlined, and majority of them now can travel to and fro. But again, remember, anything happens between Islamabad and Kabul, it's the people, it's the citizens that suffer, because then either the embassy is closed or the embassy isn't issuing visas, and you know how it is. So, sorry, I think I've taken too long.
No, totally.
I like to talk, I'm sorry. Yeah. So basically what they need to do...
We share that in common.
Right, okay. So what they need to do is, I think now, with COVID, I don't think repatriation is taking place anyway. Unless and until there is no stability in Afghanistan, it is a sham. We say that the refugees go back. Yeah, they go back. The UNHCR, I think, doubles the amount. It could even be, $800 per person. They go across the border, then they come back. And unless and until you do not have some sort of stability in Afghanistan, refugees are going to be here. And I think the ones that are here, I think we should facilitate them, and this is the least we can do.